Hokage I'll become stronger when I'm fishing. Chapter 381-400. Chapter 381. The overbearing Yagami Kangdu. And flying upside down with her, there is also Sanji. Slap. Yagami Soto looked at Nami and Sanji, who were flying upside down, stretched out his left hand and caught Nami, and Sanji fell to the ground with a thud. Seeing Yagami Aoto catch Nami with one hand, Sanji, who fell to the ground, couldn't help but have a black line, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Thank you so much. Nami, who was caught, glanced at Yagami Kangdu in shock, and after being put down by Yagami Kangdu, she thanked Yagami Kangdu with a trembling tone. And at this moment, a pacifist rushed over. Miss Nami, let's go. When Sanji saw the pacifist rushing over, a cart jumped up and greeted Nami, and at the same time planned to block it a little. But Nami didn't respond to his words, but looked at the pacifist who rushed over and opened his mouth, tilted his head and looked at Kangdu, the god of the gods, and said pitifully, "That can save us." Nami looked at Yagami Kangdu. Her big eyes showed pitiful eyes, coupled with the appearance of being a little embarrassed because of the battle. It was a bit protective. But Sanji next to him vomited blood. No matter what, Iori Kangdu doesn't intend to intervene. Asking Iori Kangdu for help is a solution, but why does my heart feel so cold? Yagami Kangdu glanced at Nami, and didn't know how much she was real or whether she was pretending, but because of her good looks, he didn't hate it. That's it. Yagami Kanto's response was only a brief one. Originally, this incident was caused by Luffy's rescue of a merman on Fishman Island under his command, which is equivalent to Luffy robbing him to do it. The pacifist rushed over without any scruples. The existence of Kangdu directly opened his mouth, and the bright rays of light converged, bombarding Nami and Yagami Kangdu, and by the way, Iori Kangdu should be solved together. Iori Kangdu saw that he had already caught the laser's attack. Clap. The golden laser was redirected by Yagami Kanto's finger, and flew back along the trajectory of the flying, just as the pacifist closed his mouth, poured into it. A roar exploded. There was a crackling sound of parts breaking from the pacifist's mouth. That had beaten Zoro, Luffy and others into a state of embarrassment. Under the hands of Yagami Kangta, flew back with just a flick of a finger. Nami couldn't help but feel a little dry. Seeing this scene, the old face wrinkled into a bitter gourd shape. Even if Rayleigh didn't mean to stop him, he didn't dare to intervene rashly. Even you have to take care of these boys, Iori Kangdu. Iori Kangdu turned his head and glanced at Kizaru, and said, "It is my rule that mermen on Fishman Island are forbidden to be caught and sold as slaves. I didn't expect some people to ignore my rules." The yellow monkey had a headache. He also knew that this incident was caused by a mermaid being trafficked, but he never expected that Yagami Kangdu would come over in person for a mere mermaid. It was a bit too exaggerated. In the past, Whitebeard protected Fishman Island, although no one dared to do so. Infringement, but occasionally there are incidents of merman being caught, and Whitebeard doesn't care about it all. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 382, Kill the Pacifists. In Yagami Kangdu, it is a real attitude that as long as it is in his own territory, he will take care of everything. I said. The ape god's Kangdu tilted his head and looked at the yellow ape, seeing that the yellow ape was still standing still, and said, "Are you a little stupid? I am here, you still don't leave. Where did you get the courage to make you dare to be alone? Standing in front of me?" Yellow ape was stunned for a moment. Before he could react, Yagami Kangdu's fist hit him in the face. Boom! A day tiger burst out, bombarding the entire front. Seeing and hearing the power of this blow, Kizaru was horrified. The whole person turned into a stream of light without hesitation, and fled towards the distance. But even so, he was still bombarded by the day tiger, and the flash exploded in the air, like a meteor, falling far into the sky. Away with a punch, and the 8 gods, Kangdu, had no intention of chasing. Kizaru's strength was not worth mentioning in front of him today, but his speed was still fast enough. If Akainu was here, he wouldn't mind taking it easy. If you kill Kizaru, you might have to chase him to the Navy headquarters. General. Seeing the golden streamer disappear, Iori Kingdu retracted his fist, hesitantly, and there was a hint of mockery in his tone. Recalling the embarrassing escape that Shinji chased before, and the desperate situation forced by Kizaru, now only need a punch, these generals have to hold their heads and run away, needless to say the joy in my heart. Escape, escape, Admiral. Sanji and the others watched this scene, even though they were all familiar with Yagami Kingta and knew Yagami Kingdu's identity and name, but there was still a wave in their hearts. Admiral, in front of Yagami Kingdu, also ran. At this moment, especially Luffy, seeing Yagami Kingdu's figure, a row of small stars seemed to flash in his eyes, he couldn't help saying. Too handsome. Is a bit of longing in the envy. Even the Admiral will turn around and run away when he sees it. This is the one piece he yearns for, the freedom he longs for. No one can stop it, and no one can stop it, even the Admiral is the same. Boom, boom. The remaining two pacifists are still continuing to hunt down Luffy, Zoro and others. Yagami Kingdu withdrew his gaze, looked at the two pacifists, flicked his fingers, and shot two day tigers only the size of a finger. Bang! This day tiger accurately bombarded the pacifist's chest, and in an instant, the pacifist's chest was completely sunken, like a vortex, twisted like a vortex, and the internal precision machinery crackled for a while, and finally became a pile of iron slag. Okay, you can leave now. After destroying the two pacifists, Yagami Soto retracted his fingers and looked at Nami Road next to him. Nami gradually came back to her senses, smiled and said, "This is you who saved us again, thank you very much, but we were all seriously injured in order to maintain your rules." Oh. Yagami Kingdu glanced at Nami and said, "Where is your serious injury? Come over and let me check it for you." Sanji next to him heard this, he instantly felt his eyes split open. Just when he was about to say something, he was held down by Zoro who came over at an unknown time. "What are you doing, idiot nosebleed man?" "Ah, what are you talking about, bastard green algae head?" Sanji's anger was instantly transferred to Zoro. Both of them were seriously injured, but at the moment when they quarreled, it seemed that all injuries were healed. Chapter 383. The King of the Times, the Eight Gods Kingdu. Nami's expression stiffened slightly when she heard Yagami Aoto's words. "This. Come on, let me check it out and see how I can compensate you." Yagami Aoto glanced at Nami and walked directly towards her. Nami was startled, took a step back, and said, "I'm fine, the injury isn't that serious." If you want to be petty and cheap, you have to see who the target is." Yagami Kingdu did not stop, but stopped in front of Nami, looked at her with a hint of playfulness in his eyes, and said, "I'll check it for you if you're slightly injured." Nami panicked and involuntarily looked at Luffy and the others in the distance, but Zoro was still quarreling with Sanji, while Luffy and the others seemed to see nothing. Light and sound can even distort space. Yagami Kingdu doesn't want others to see anything, and naturally others can't see it at all. Even if the space is distorted, even Hades Lake can only perceive that the space is distorted. Yagami Soto and Nami disappear, but cannot perceive anything more specific. 3 minutes later, the screen shook and returned to its original state. Nami bit Bai's lips and looked at Yagami Kingdu with shame and anger, and then puffed her cheeks again, with a pitiful look. "Nami, what's wrong with you?" Luffy noticed that Nami was a little strange and couldn't help but ask. In their eyes, Yagami Aoto was in front of Nami and said a few words to Nami. "No, nothing." Nami looked at Iori with a grieved. While responding to Luffy, Yagami Kingdu turned a blind eye to her grievances, asking for it. It's true that he was injured a little bit, and some places are still bleeding, so, if you encounter any danger in the future, you can go to the Wangwo to hide. Yagami Kanto said casually to Nami. Nami looked aggrieved, but she had already been taken advantage of. With the idea of not losing money, she said, "Where is the world?" "My territory, in the New World." Yagami Kingdu responded casually, ignoring Luffy and the others, and turned to look at Rayleigh. Since the appearance of Yagami Kingdu, Rayleigh has been on the sidelines, completely unconcerned, until Yagami Kingdu looks over. Eight Gods Kingdu smiled faintly at Rayleigh and said, They admired the name for a long time, Pluto Rayleigh. Your Excellency is overrated." Rayleigh smiled and said, "A long time ago, I heard that someone killed the Tianlong people in Chambord. I was thinking to see who has such a great spirit, but unfortunately I never had the chance, and today I finally saw it myself." Rayleigh's journey on this great route is enough to be considered a legend, but compared to today's Yagami Kingdu, he is no longer on the same path. Today's Yagami Kingdu can say that he can reach Ralph Drew anytime he wants. Among the four emperors, only the red-haired Shanks was not defeated by Yagami Kingdu, but he couldn't possibly be Yagami Kingdu's opponent. Even if he didn't board Ralph Drew, in this era, there are already many people who use the name One Piece to call Yagami Kingdu. Defeated all the generals, defeated all the four emperors, not One Piece, what else? Even if Yagami Kingdu did not admit it, nor did he show interest in Ralph Drew, there is no doubt that the top pirate of this era belongs to Iori Kingdu. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 384, The Era of the World is Over. It's just bravery for a while. Eight God Kingdu shook his head and said, without absolute strength, doing something like that can't be described with courage, it can only be said to be impulsive. Rayleigh heard Yagami Kingdu's words, he couldn't help laughing, and said, "How long have you been a pirate at that time? Isn't it the nature of young people to be impulsive?" "Yes." Eight Gods Kingdu nodded and said leisurely, "You don't get impulsive when you are young, but when you get older, how can you still be impulsive?" These words reminded Riley of those days. Just got on Roger's ship and went on the great route with Roger. He, the deputy captain, also did a lot of impulsive things, and Roger was more courageous many times. Looking back on it now, I can't help but feel a little lost, and my eyes don't know. It also feels a bit sparkling. Young. Gone forever. Whitebeard is getting old too. Senses, Rayleigh couldn't help but sigh and said, in the past, the Navy and the government would not have dared to make such a decision. If it is Whitebeard in his peak state, although Garp and the Warring States period are enough to suppress it, they cannot stop Whitebeard from destroying, and the power of the shock fruit is enough to destroy the Navy headquarters. Even if it wins, it will be a tragic victory, and the Navy will not choose to fight Whitebeard desperately at such a high price. The times are advancing. The Eight Gods Kingdu said with deep eyes, the era is coming. Yes. Pluto Rayleigh nodded, and you don't know if my old bones can still see the arrival of a new era. Times and times are different. 22 years ago, after the death of Roger, the Pirate King, the world entered the era of the Great Pirates, but at the same time, the era of the Great Pirates was also considered to be the era of Whitebeard. The Golden Lion broke his legs, and Roger was executed. No one can compete with Whitebeard. Whitebeard stands at the top of the sea, so the era belongs to him. And a few years ago, from the moment when Yagami Kingdu defeated Whitebeard, it can be said that this era belongs to Yagami Kingdu. But this era belongs to Yagami Kingdu, but it is still called the era of the Great Pirates, and its name has not changed. It is still the era when the government ruled the world and pirates ran rampant. And at this moment, in the dialogue between Yagami Kingdu and Rayleigh, the new era mentioned is a truly new era, an era that is no longer named after the Big Pirate. Even though the power of the world government is still huge and stable, the emergence of the Kingdu pirates, the construction of the 10,000 kingdoms, and the development of the Revolutionary Army have long threatened the existence of the world government itself. Rayleigh was clear. That belongs to the world government is probably coming to an end. 3 Yagami Kingdu's appearance in the Chambord Islands still caused a shock in the naval headquarters, which shocked the entire Navy and did not understand Yagami Kingdu's intentions. Could it be that Iori Soto is going to interfere in their war with Whitebeard? To Iori Soto, Whitebeard is the enemy, but relatively speaking, the Navy is more hostile and stronger than the Whitebeard pirates. Report to the Marshal. A major general from the headquarters hurried into the top office and reported to Marshal Warring States Wei. The captain of the first team of the Eight Gods Kingdu pirates has returned to Wangguo, and the captain of the second team, Shiliu Yu, is still staying in 100 Kingdoms. The site of the Beast Pirates. Chapter 385, Mermaid Kemi. Hearing the Major General's report, Warring States was slightly relieved. It seems that the Eight Gods Kangdu pirates have just wiped out the Beast's pirates, and taking over its territory is a hassle. To intervene in the coming war. What about the other captains? Qingji asked in a low voice while sitting on the sofa beside him. The Major General Shen Chengwei reported, the captain of the 6th Division is missing, and the rest of the captains have found traces in Wano. Warring States pondered for a moment, then said, "Don't be careless, let people continue to keep an eye on the movements of the Eight Gods Kangdu pirates, and report to me at any time." Yes. The Major General responded and left the office. After he left, Qingzi raised his head slightly and said, "Since the forces of Yagami Kangdu are all on the Wano countryside, then we can rest assured that only Yagami Kangdu is here alone, and he can still deal with it." Warring States also nodded. As long as the Yagami Kangdu pirates are not dispatched with an entire army, only one Yagami Kangdu will not be afraid of their navy headquarters. They can divide up to 2 top combat powers to suppress Yagami Kangdu, and the remaining combat power is still enough to deal with Whitebeard. In fact, to deal with the Whitebeard pirates, there is no need for a large gathering of troops in the naval headquarters, and the reason for the large gathering is to make complete plans on the one hand, and prepare for other possible situations on the other hand. Peach Rabbit and Tea Dolphin, as well as Zephyr who leads the troops, will not appear on the frontal battlefield, unless the Red Hair pirates also appear and attack the navy, they will be dispatched. Just relying on the front 3 generals and Chiwahai is enough to deal with the Whitebeard pirates. Chambord Islands. Somewhere in a tavern, Yagami Soto sat opposite. Whether the Straw Hat Gang will get the news of Ace's execution and then participate in the war on the top is still unknown, and Yagami Kingta is not very interested. It doesn't matter if the gang goes or not. After chatting with Riley for a few words, I felt that it was quite easy to chat, so I followed Riley to this bar, drinking and chatting. "Mr. Riley." Just as Yagami Kanto and Rayleigh were chatting about the new world, a voice came over, and the mermaid Kemi with short emerald green hair came in from outside. "She has been hiding here since the accident." "You are Kemi." Yagami Kangdu took a sip of wine and glanced sideways at Kemi. When Kemi noticed Iori Kangdu, she was also slightly stunned, and then she showed an unexpected look, and said in shock, "You are Lord Iori Kangdu." As a mermaid on Fishman Island, of course she still knows who owns Fishman Island, and no one has ever dared to offend Fishman Island over the years. Even Yagami Kangdu's attitude towards Fishman Island is far more than Whitebeard's, not to mention the island's affairs. Even if the mermaid is caught by slave traders, the Yagami Kangdu pirates will take action for it. After several times in a row, there is no more. Which slave trade organization dares to touch the mermaid? Today, it was purely a few slave traders who discovered Kemi on land. Well, you know me. Iori Kangdu looked at Kemi with a faint smile, and said, "I should rarely go to Fishman Island. It's strange not to know." Philo reminds you. 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 386. The Prelude to the War. Kemi murmured in her heart, even if she was a bit of a dazed mermaid, it was impossible for her to know nothing about a character like Yagami Kangdu, not to mention Yagami Kangdu was the protector of Fishman Island. You also have a share in saving Kemi today. Seeing that Kemi was a little cautious, Iori Kangdu looked at Rayleigh in front of him and smiled. Rayleigh laughed and said, "Kemi and I have known each other for a long time. We originally planned to pretend to be slaves and blackmail the buyer. I didn't expect such a thing to happen, and it is only natural to save her." Yagami Kangdu nodded, and after having a cup with Rayleigh, he said to Kemi, who was standing there, "Sit down, don't be so restrained. By the way, how is Jinbei now?" This sentence was also asked casually. As King Kibukai, on the one hand, he is in contact with the government, on the other hand, he assists Whitebeard everywhere. On the other hand, as a powerful faction who shelters Fishman Island, he is also connected with the Yagami Kingdu pirates. But when the war is about to come, it is absolutely impossible to step on three boats. In the past, the world government could turn a blind eye, but now it will never approve. Jinping opposes the government's war on Whitebeard. Rayleigh took over a topic that Kemi didn't know very well, and said, "There are many islands protected by Whitebeard. No matter who wins or loses in this battle, the sea will not be calm. Jinping wants to prevent the war from happening, but is locked up by the world government. Get up, you should be advancing the city." This result did not exceed Yagami Kanto's expectations. However, the world will be in chaos sooner or later. Even if Whitebeard does not fall into the top of the war, how can he be able to sit in the position of the fourth emperor for so long at the age of 72? Yagami Kingdu looks top-notch now. 30 years away is still a long way from aging, but Whitebeard has really touched the limit of flesh and blood. It can even be said, it was the war on the top that brought out the last afterglow of Whitebeard, so that Whitebeard would not die on the bed because of injuries. If he didn't stand up to the war, with Whitebeard's deteriorating body, maybe in 2 or 3 years, he would fall down and couldn't get up. If Whitebeard loses, what are you going to do? Rayleigh stared at the wine bottle, his thoughts were flying, and he asked as if talking to himself. "8 God Kingdu said calmly, I will take over his territory." Whitebeard died, all the islands sheltered by Whitebeard were attacked by various pirates and dark forces, but this time, Yagami Kingdu had already prepared several sub-teams under his command, and if Whitebeard died in battle, then take over all the sites. Then the sea is yours. In a trance. Back then, although he and Roger swept across the sea and beat the Whitebeard and the Golden Lion, they couldn't defeat the Whitebeard and the Golden Lion. Can be conquered, but it cannot be destroyed. But today's Yagami Kingdu is already the strongest character in this sea, and the Yagami Kingdu pirates are already the strongest pirate force. No one. Even if Whitebeard and Redhead join forces, they may not be able to resist Yagami Kingdu's subsequent offensive, not to mention Whitebeard's battle on the top, and most of them have to put an end to their life, and the only remaining red-haired pirates will be. It is even more impossible to stop Yagami Kingdu. Do whatever you want. This is the next world. Chapter 387. Execution of Ace. 8 God Kingdu shook his head slightly, and said in a leisurely tone, "I can't talk about it. Isn't there a mountain in front of me that has not been climbed for 800 years? World government." Rayleigh smiled lightly and said, "They won't be sitting in that position for long. We are anxious about O'Hara, but the answer will be revealed one day. Unfortunately, I am not interested in history. I am only interested in creating the future." Yagami Kanto took a sip of wine calmly. Riley froze for a moment, then laughed, did not speak, and drank. 9 days later. Straw Hat Luffy and his gang broke into the Advanced City, made a big noise in the Advanced City prison, and released a series of characters from Haisha and Jepping, but in the end they missed a step and failed to rescue Fire Fist Ace. And Blackbeard, who arrived later, was wreaking havoc in the advancing city, fighting with the director Magellan to lose both, but in the end, a large number of prisoners were released in the Infinite Hell. At this time, the prison ship that escorted Fire Fist Ace had already passed the acceleration of the Gate of Justice and the Great Maelstrom at sea, and arrived at the Marine headquarters, Marijoa. At this moment, the entire Marijoa was a solemn scene. Hardly any navy could be seen. There was a smile on his face, and no one could laugh at this time. Up to those lieutenant generals and major generals, with serious expressions, down to the school officers and lieutenants, with nervous and dignified expressions, all of them are holding their sabers or fire guns. 100,000 Navy elites. The highest level of war alert. Everything is only for the arrival of one of the 3 legendary pirates, Baihu. Doer Newgate. Don't let your guard down. It doesn't matter. Whatever happens, it's been 3 hours, and by then it's all over. There is a giant lieutenant admiral of the Navy headquarters, aiming at the 100,000 naval elites on the Square of Justice. Standing directly in front of the Navy headquarters, are the 5 kings under the Shichibukai. Except for Mihawk, the world's largest swordsman, and the tyrant Bartholomew, the rest are pirates who have emerged in recent years. He used to be a pirate hunter and hunted down hundreds of millions of pirates. With such a big battle, Wang Shachiwahai still has 100,000 naval elites and 3 admirals. If the Whitebeard is interested, he should stay in his hometown for the elderly. One of the 7 sea monsters under the king smiled and said, "Of course. Everyone present knows that with the character of Whitebeard, it is impossible not to come, but will definitely come. For such a character, dying on the sickbed of old age is a shame, and only the battlefield is their proper destination." The generals have appeared. At the bottom of the execution platform, 3 chairs were placed there early. At this time, the 3 of Akainu Kizaru and Chingzi walked out of the headquarters one after another, came to the execution platform, and sat down on the chairs. 3 of them wore the Navy's righteous cloak and did not speak, but as the 3 of them sat down on the chairs, it was like a reassurance pill, which made all the navies eat it. 3 admirals, the highest combat power of the naval headquarters. With these 3 people sitting under the execution stand, it is as if 3 mountain peaks are standing behind them, making countless navies feel at ease. Overtime was finally brought to the execution platform with handcuffs and shackles. Then came out, the Marshal Sengoku of the Navy headquarters, and the hero Garp. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 388, Whitebeard debuts. Sengoku and Garp walked all the way, came to the execution stand, and said to Garp, "That's it, Garp, I'm going to announce everything." "As you please, I'm going down." Garp responded with a low emotion, then came to the bottom of the execution platform, and stood with Chief of Staff Crane. "It's not your fault." Crane glanced sideways at the silent Garp. Garp grinned, hiding his inner emotions with a big smile, and said, "It's still a gentlewoman at this time, Xiaohei." Execution platform. Ace heard Garp's voice, opened his eyes and glanced. The eyes in his eyes were indescribably complicated. "Ace, say your father's name." Warring States picked up the loudspeaker bug, came to the execution platform, and said righteously and sternly. Ace closed his eyes and said, "My dad is Whitebeard." "No." Warring States cut off Ace's words, saying, "Your mother's name is Portgazluju. She had an affair with a man before her death. That man was once the biggest criminal in the world, and later he was once called the Pirate King." Speaking of this, the tone of the Warring States suddenly became extremely stern, and shouted to the world, "Yes. Your biological father is One Piece. Gall Roger." As soon as this statement came out, the whole place was suddenly silent. In the Chambord archipelago and many other islands, the people who used video cameras to remotely watch the scene of the Navy headquarters were also silent. The bloodline of One Piece is still in the world. A glance at the execution platform, this news was a little unexpected to him. In the town of Rog that year, he was also one of the witnesses of Roger's execution and uttering the words that opened the era of the great pirates. Ace gritted his teeth and clenched his fists. Naturally, he didn't approve of the published life experience. In his heart, the father was the only one with Whitebeard. But just as Ace gritted his teeth, the audience was in an uproar, and when countless people couldn't help but talk, a rear admiral suddenly came over in panic. "Marshal of the Warring States. Something happened." Report, the door of justice was opened without anyone's instructions, and the power room could not be contacted. "What?" Warring States turned his head, his face suddenly changed. He immediately raised his head and looked at the sea in the distance, only to see the shadows of ships gradually appearing on the misty sea. The shadows of these ships gradually reveal their shapes, and they are quite different pirate ships. If you count them carefully, there are as many as 30 or 40. Are you going to attack? Wait, I haven't found Whitebeard yet. Seeing the appearance of the large fleet of pirates, countless navies showed nervousness. And just as everyone was searching for the trail of Whitebeard, a huge shadow appeared on the sea in the harbor, and then countless bubbles surging up. At the top of the fortress of the naval headquarters, the space here is distorted. Even if you see the domineering look, you will not be able to detect the abnormality here. 8God Kingdu didn't know when, just sat there like this, as if he had been here for a long time, and as if he had just arrived. He just looked at the harbor below, at the bubbling bubbles, his eyes flickered slightly, like a sigh, and he murmured slowly like a sigh. Chapter 389, The Navy's Inflated Ambitions. The plot has not changed. Under the shocked and unexpected gazes of countless people, the Moby Dick, which was wrapped in coated bubbles, came out of the sea like that. Dang, 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 a figure wearing a cloak and holding a naginata sword, just like that walking out step by step, he came to the front of the deck. The end of the naginata collided with the board of the ship, making a dang-dang sound, orderly, without any confusion and anxiety. His upper body is naked. Although he is old, his aura still makes the hearts of countless navies terrified. Whitebeard. Edward Newgate. With the appearance of Whitebeard, the war has finally begun. Crack. Whitebeard bent his arms. The arms that were old but still muscular, suddenly turned outward, hammering in the above the air. The power of the shaking fruit was stimulated, and the surrounding air was cracked like a mirror shattered, spreading in all directions. Dad. Ace was bound on the execution platform. Seeing this scene, he couldn't help but grit his teeth slightly, and couldn't help shouting, "Why are you here? It was I who acted without authorization to get to this point." Ace is not a fool. He knows in his heart that such a large lineup of the Navy headquarters is not only to execute him, but also to destroy the Whitebeard pirates. But, as Garp said, Whitebeard is not. Captain of the 2nd and 2nd Divisions under his command was publicly executed. No matter the circumstances, he would come here. This is something that Whitebeard, before the Yagami Kingdu, and after Roger, ruled this year. There is absolutely no way to back down. No, yes, I let you go. Whitebeard spoke calmly. At the same time, Marco and others also folded their arms in front of them and said, "Yes, I heard it too, you have suffered a lot, Ace." In any case, the cause of this incident was that Blackbeard killed Sage, the captain of the 4th Division, and Ace went to sea for this reason. Although there is a willful factor in it, such a thing, if it was them, I am afraid it would be just as tolerant. Nope. Wait, Ace, we're here to save you. Navy headquarters, prepare to die. Countless pirates grinned, facing the Navy headquarters without any fear. Their faces showed a vicious and rebellious look, and shouted loudly. At the bottom of the execution platform, although the three of Chingzi Akainu and Kizaru were still sitting there safely, their domineering arrogance was already open, and they were all ready. Going to do it. We've got a bunch of troublesome guys. As the three of them spoke one sentence at a time, the earth suddenly began to tremble slightly, and the tremor gradually became larger and evolved into a violent earthquake. When countless people looked at it in horror, they saw that on both sides of the naval headquarters, there was a huge tsunami that was large enough to drown the entire naval fortress, and it roared like this. It's coming because of the tsunami. Had fought with Whitebeard countless times, looked sideways at the tsunami and said, "The earthquake man who shook the fruit, Whitebeard, Edward Newgate." At this moment, who watched the scene of the Navy headquarters through the broadcast had expressions of shock and horror on their faces. Even though most of them lived on the Great Route, this level of power was still not something they could comprehend at will. Here it is. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 390, The World's Greatest Swordsman, Hokage I'll. This is the power of Whitebeard. It's terrible. Caused a tsunami, unbelievable. While many people were shocked, they couldn't help but murmured. Some people can't help but think that the power of Whitebeard is already so terrifying. How terrifying the strength of Yagami Kingdu who defeated Whitebeard and destroyed the beast pirates not long ago. Clap la la. Huge ocean waves poured down like the sky turned upside down, to devour the naval headquarters, and at the critical moment, Qingji dodged into the air, and the ability of the frozen fruit was activated. Ice Age. 2 ice branches spread out, inserted into the huge waves, and in the blink of an eye, the huge tsunami that was enough to swallow the naval headquarters was frozen into 2 icebergs. This scene caused countless people shocked. That's Admiral of the Navy headquarters, Qingji. It actually froze such a terrifying tsunami. In front of this level of power, countless people feel their insignificance, and they are not above a level at all, even those generals and colonels of the Navy. After freezing the tsunami, Qingji hit Whitebeard with a tentative attack. Qingji, you little bastard. Whitebeard snorted and slammed into the void with a sudden punch. Kacha. The air suddenly shattered, and a shocking force bombarded the entire front and hit Qingji's body, causing Qingji's body to be shattered instantly, turning into ice cubes and falling to the sea, but then freeze the sea in the entire harbor. The scene fell into a brief silence. After a few seconds of stagnation, Admiral swung the blade in his hand and shouted, "Bombardment! Destroy the Moby Dick!" With the issuance of this order, the stagnant battlefield finally broke out again, and countless pirates rushed off the ship with a roar, stepping on the ice and rushing towards the harbor. At the same time, countless admirals and colonels on the Navy side also dispatched one after another, holding fire guns and swords and shouting to meet them. War broke out completely, just as the generals of the Navy headquarters and the pirates under the Whitebeard rushed together. A dazzling sword chi suddenly burst into the air. This sword aura was so powerful that wherever it went, countless people retreated for the sake of retreating, and the harbor that was frozen by Qingji was almost divided into 2 under this sword energy. That's the world, the #1 swordsman, Hokage I'll. Some people looked at this scene and couldn't help looking in the direction of the sword chi attacking with horror, and immediately saw the figure holding the black knife. Many people in the Chambord archipelago were all shocked at the moment. This slash is too exaggerated, are they really still human? Boom! Under the shocking gazes of countless people, the vast sword energy suddenly stopped, was resisted by a figure, and was lifted into the sky, and finally disappeared. It was naturally the captain of the 3rd Division, Diamond Yoja, who blocked Hawkeye's slash. If you want to reduce losses as much as possible, you have to catch the thief first. Kizaru looked at the fierce battle, stood up, and walked forward. He was injured by Yagami Kangdu in the Chambord archipelago before, and he has almost recovered these days. However, that incident still made him unhappy for several days. At this time, when the war broke out, he was naturally unhappy and planned to vent. 390th chapters, Giant Army. Whoosh! The yellow monkey turned into a golden light, and suddenly came to the mid-air, and an 8-foot Changguyu bombarded the Whitebeard. A young man is the strongest in the world, he has no choice but to be bored, but an old guy who has lost the title of the strongest in the world seems to have no problem with bullying. However, his laser failed to hit Whitebeard, and was blocked by the captain of the first team, Marco. How can I let you catch the king all at once? Marco snorted, and after blocking Kizaru, he flew up and fought with Kiwi in the sky, forcing Kiwi to fall back to the ground. I blocked the attack of Kizaru, and I am a big man again. Captain of the first team of the Whitebeard Pirates, Marco the Phoenix, I heard that no matter what kind of injury he suffers, he can recover under that blue flame. Someone looked up at the sky, looked at Marco's figure, and spoke in horror. Giant troops, also pay attention in the air. After Kazuna fell back to the ground, he spoke to the giant army. The giant troops of the Navy headquarters responded in unison, and immediately stepped forward to join the battlefield. Giant Army. The captain of the 3rd Division, Diamond Yoja, looked at the giant troop rushing over from a distance, and couldn't help but think of the giant corps under Yagami Kangdu. The giant army under the command of Yagami Kangdu of the Navy headquarters is not of the same level in terms of momentum alone. Especially the leader of the giant corps, Helding, it is difficult for him to even exist, and it is inseparable from Marco. Compared with that guy's giant army, you guys are still far behind. Joes shouted angrily, suddenly punched out the ice layer and cracked, struggling to lift an iceberg like giant ice, and smashed it towards the giant army. Looked at the huge ice block that came, his face was gloomy. It was not the ice block that made him unhappy, but the words in Jaws' mouth. Of the Yagami Kangdu pirates has now become the most terrifying troop in the world, a terrifying combat force that is enough to cause headaches for the Navy headquarters. In comparison, the giant troop on the Navy's side feels a bit like playing at home. That the Navy and the government don't have devil fruits, but they are reluctant to use them for giants. Combining them together, the giant troop they created was nondescript. If it wasn't for the giant corps under Yagami Kangdu to be famous first, it would be better if there was a giant corps there. The troops that serve for justice can't be compared with criminals who fight for pirates. Akainu could only have a gloomy face, using the name of justice to block the fact that the giant army was far inferior to the giant army, and snorted and threw out a fist. Boom! The huge fist of magma surging, one punch evaporated the huge ice block without a trace, and then turned into countless volcanic bombs, bombarding the entire harbor. Although there is a melee in the harbor now, Akainu doesn't care about his own people at all. As long as most of his attacks hit the pirates under Whitebeard's command, it's enough. Boom, boom, boom. The violent roar shook hundreds of miles for a while. Under the eruption of the volcanic bomb, ordinary pirates and navies could only scream and escape, and it was difficult to resist. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 392, The war broke out in an all-round way. With the appearance of Little Oz, the battle situation finally entered the fierce attack of Whitebeard's side, and finally, with Oz's fall, he completely entered the bay. But there is no doubt that the invasion of the bay was a strategy formulated by the Navy side long ago, otherwise the Warring States period and the 3 major generals would all fight together, and with the king under Chiwahai, it would be difficult to enter the bay head-on. After letting the Whitebeard party into the harbor, under the order of the Warring States period, a special battle plan was already prepared. However, before the Navy could implement the battle plan, a voice suddenly came from above. So far no one has noticed that Yagami Kangdu, who is sitting on the top of the naval fortress, also raised his head and looked up with interest. It still fell. I only heard the sound of ice breaking. A warship fell from the sky, and smashed into the battlefield like this. Along with the warship, there were also Hai Sha Jinping, the Shemale King Ivankov, and the Straw Hat Luffy group. Everyone, including Whitebeard, was stunned for a few seconds. "It's your family again, asshole Garp." After Sengoku reacted, he couldn't help looking at Garp with gritted teeth. And Garp opened his mouth wide and his eyes widened at this time. He didn't expect Luffy to break into the battlefield of the Navy headquarters at this time. What a man who keeps talking, Straw Hat. Hawkeye also glanced over, and he was also very concerned about the red-haired person who entrusted the hat and an arm. Warring States glared at Garp angrily, then turned his head, looked at Hexia Jinping, clenched his fists and said, "Is this your choice, Jinping?" "That's right, I don't do Chiwahai anymore." Jinbei stood next to Luffy and replied, "This time I must rescue Brother Ace." This is Navy headquarters. Of Luffy was Zoro holding a knife. He looked up at the execution platform and said, "Hey Luffy, your brother is right there." Huh, they, all ruthless characters. Sanji lit a cigarette, took a puff, and pretended to be relaxed, but in fact he felt an extremely heavy pressure inside. On this battlefield, Chiwahai is not the dominant player. People like the Admiral and Whitebeard are the top forces in this war. "Are you afraid?" Zoro spoke without turning his head. Sanji heard this, he was immediately annoyed and said, "You are afraid, idiot green algae." The two were about to quarrel here, but Luffy took a deep breath and rushed forward, knocking 2 navies away in a row, saying, "Ace, I'm here to save you." "Hey, Luffy." When Zoro and Sanji saw Luffy rushing out, they could only take a deep breath and dash forward suddenly. But before the three of them could run far, a magnificent sword chi swept across the entire battlefield and stopped in front of Luffy and the others in an instant. Hawkeye. Zoro's eyes suddenly froze, and he looked at the figure holding the black knife in the distance. He didn't think he could win Hawkeye now, and it was unexpected to meet Hawkeye here. Nami also noticed Hawkeye, and couldn't help but burst into tears. Hawkeye is here, and the Admiral is also here. What the hell happened to her? To come to such a place. Chapter 393, Bartholomew Bear. Hawkeye also glanced at Sauron sideways, and did not speak, but secretly said in his heart, "This battlefield is still a little too early for you." Chang. Before Hawkeye could come forward, Foil Beasta, the captain of the 5th Division of the Whitebeard Pirates, rushed over, blocking Hawkeye and not giving Hawkeye a chance to attack Luffy and the others. Seeing that Hawkeye was blocked by another swordsman, Zoro also suppressed his thoughts and continued to charge forward with Luffy. Under the cover of Ivankov and Jinping, a group of 3 moved forward like a broken bamboo. As Luffy and his gang broke into the battlefield, the style of the battlefield on the top of the war also changed, and countless eyes focused on Luffy, making him inexplicably the center of the battlefield. A group of prisoners brought by Luffy to advance the city, as well as Chiwu Hexia Jinping, are not ordinary combat power, and they also have a considerable impact on this battlefield. The Navy, which had a huge advantage in the past, was also hindered in the offensive. Ready to start the battle plan. Warring States stood on the execution platform, looking at the chaotic battlefield, holding the phone and speaking in a deep voice, at the same time staring at Whitebeard from a distance. The Whitebeard pirates, together with the Straw Hats, rushed towards the square below the execution platform, while the Navy began to fight and retreat, retreating from the ice in the harbor to the square, constantly intercepting the Whitebeards and the others. Attack. Just after the Warring States order was issued, about 20 pacifists appeared at the rear of the battlefield and began to attack the members of the Whitebeard pirates recklessly as ordered. Bartholomew. No, a human weapon of the world government. Marco looked coldly at the pacifism behind. Whitebeard also glanced at the back at the moment, but it was the enemy behind the deep voice, and he rushed in from the front. At such a time, if the troops are divided to deal with the combat effectiveness of the pacifists and scientific troops behind, it will undoubtedly greatly delay the pace of the attack on the square, and Whitebeard can see it very clearly at this time. The captain of the Squard pirates under Whitebeard, the giant vortex spider Squard, appeared on the Moby Dick, where Whitebeard was standing. "Squard, are you okay? I just contacted you." Whitebeard glanced sideways at Squard. Squard said, "Ah, I'm fine, Dad." The pirates under his command suffered heavy casualties. He stepped forward. Whitebeard didn't care either. But just as Squard walked up, Admiral Akainu from the Navy side, as well as a few people, including Marshal Sengoku, flashed a shimmering gleam in their eyes. Observable. Just the next moment. Unexpected by everyone on Whitebeard's side, Squard suddenly turned over and stabbed Whitebeard's chest with a knife. Whitebeard has hardly raised any vigilance towards Squard, and since he is already old, he can avoid Ace's sneak attack in his sleep far less than 2 years ago. Is not able to make any response. But Sengoku, Akainu and the others showed their indifferent expressions. At the very top of the naval headquarters, Yagami Soto was silently flicking his fingers. Sigh. A1 stone flew out of the sky, wrapped in the power of the Day Tiger, and crossed the space in the blink of an eye, and hit Squard's blade with such precision. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 394, Squard Betrayed. Anyway, he is a character who fought with me. How can you let your navy use such insidious means to weaken Whitebeard's combat power? Yagami Kanto muttered to himself with calm eyes. The stone hit Squard's blade. This arrogant sword wrapped around the armed color. Under the impact of the inconspicuous stone, the domineering on it shattered in an instant, the entire steel-cast blade, like bricks, shattered into countless pieces. Blast. This scene made almost all the faces of warring states and the others suddenly change. Their eyes and sights were already open, and they turned their heads to look for it, but in this chaotic battlefield, they couldn't find where the stone came from. Squard, what are you doing? Marco was also stunned by this change, and then flew back suddenly, punching Squard in the face, knocking him to the ground. Strange color flashed in Whitebeard's eyes. They couldn't detect anything more specific in the Warring States period, but he, who was the closest, noticed that on the stone that shattered Squard's long knife, condensed is a force that he is very familiar with. Is he here too? Whitebeard raised his head and glanced at the battlefield, but he did not find the figure of Yagami Kanto. Not finding Yagami Kangdu, Whitebeard's thoughts flashed through his mind, but he did not intend to continue his search, but glanced at the warring states on the execution platform with a cold face. Why are you doing this, Squard? Marco angrily pressed Squard's head, shouted at him and said with gritted teeth, "Don't pretend to be stupid, Marco, didn't you force me? Use our lives for Ace's life. It's your deal with the Navy. Now we have no way out, aren't we the ones who are under attack?" Stupid. Marco was furious and cursed. Even if he didn't know the specific situation, he could guess that Squard was mostly deceived by the Navy. Fortunately, the knife just now was rescued by someone, otherwise, if Whitebeard was stabbed by his son under such circumstances, it would be simply it's unimaginable. Say I betrayed my sons. Whitebeard looked at the warring states, put the naginata in his hand on the board of the ship, and slammed his fists out, hitting the void on both sides. The force of shock erupted, and the two icebergs formed by the frozen pheasant's waves were hardened. The shocking smash. This blow directly opened the way for the pirate group under Whitebeard, so the so-called betrayal is naturally self-defeating. As a pirate, you have to decide what you should believe. Whitebeard shouted loudly, "If you are not afraid of death, just come with me." In the roar, Whitebeard held the naginata, and finally jumped off the deck of the Moby Dick, and slammed into the battlefield. Damn. Seeing this scene, warring states couldn't help but scolded secretly. Not to mention that the plan didn't work, but instead stimulated Whitebeard and made Whitebeard enter a state of rage, which really gave the enemy an assist. Boom, boom, boom. Whitebeard, who entered the battlefield, burst out with terrifying power under his anger. Much weaker than when he fought against Yagami Kangdu a few years ago, on this battlefield, he is still unstoppable and invincible. Nightmarish power shattered the ice surface and the ground of the square inch by inch, sending countless people flying upside down. Chapter 395, Ice Age. Damn. Seeing this scene, Akainu couldn't help but cursed in his heart. The whole person slammed forward, punched out, and the magma erupted, attacking Whitebeard. If you make trouble again, this island will be destroyed. Gu-la-la-la, then you can give it a try. Whitebeard grinned, the 5 fingers of his right hand folded into a fist, and the power of the white concussion condensed on the fist, and slammed it against the Akainu's fist. Boom! The shock and the magma collided violently. Although Whitebeard's body is already aging, and the fighting power is not as good as when he fought Yagami Kangta, but under the condition that he was not stabbed and the dark wound did not occur, the frontal battle was still terrifying. During the collision of the two fists, the magma continuously exploded and shattered, and the force of shock finally took the upper hand, attacking the past brazenly, and the whole person who was beaten by Akainu went backwards, which is difficult to match. 1. Aokiji immediately came to support, and a hockey puck froze Whitebeard, but before he could make another move, the puck was shattered directly by Whitebeard. Whitebeard held the naginata in both hands and slashed forward. Kacha! The entire atmosphere in front of him shattered like an ice surface, and a terrifying shock force swept through it, and Aokiji's body shattered in an instant, and was blasted backwards. The yellow monkey in the distance cursed secretly in his stomach, but at this time he had to bite the bullet and come up. His figure flickered, and he came to the Whitebeard. Dao laser. Chang. Whitebeard's domineering arrogance has long since spread. At this moment, while the dark injury has not occurred, he can fully react to the speed of facing the Japanese ape. He bends his right arm, condensing his martial energy, and directly blocks it in front of his chest. A few lasers were hard connected. Whitebeard threw out a fist, and the yellow ape was so embarrassed that he had to turn into a golden light to escape. Short burst. The three naval admirals took turns taking turns, but all were repelled by Whitebeard. The strength of the once strongest man in the world shook the battlefield for a time, making countless people tremble. Ice Age. The green pheasant was blasted away. Recondensed body, although it was a bit embarrassing to be beaten, but as a naval admiral, it would not be easily injured by Whitebeard in the front. As soon as he remembered the Ice Age, he froze in the past towards Whitebeard. At the same time, Akainu also launched an attack on Whitebeard, and after retreating to a long distance, Kizaru launched several laser beams. But the captains under the Whitebeard are not vegetarians. The wheel battle is too much. How can it be possible for the Whitebeard to be one enemy three? Go away. Marco rushed towards Akainu and kicked it. He was also very angry with Akainu at the moment, because it was Akainu who lied to Squid and made him almost stab Whitebeard. Humph. Diamond Yoja also rushed towards Aokiji, armed with a domineering look, and slammed into the Ice Age, forcing Aokiji to put away his ultimate move. As for the last Kizaru, he was also entangled by several nearby captains. Of the Whitebeard pirates are all at the level of the three disasters and the generals, and although the captains in the lower ranks are not as good as the three disasters, there are not a few who offer a reward of more than 450 million. Still can't beat the generals, but not to be killed in seconds. With Whitebeard's personal dispatch, the entire battlefield has completely entered the white hot. The outbreak of a full-scale war, the massive momentum of the blow, made countless people tremble. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. 390th Chapters, Tekken Garp. This is the Whitebeard Pirates. It's terrible. It's unbelievable. Whitebeard has become so strong. How powerful must the Yagami Kingdu who defeated Whitebeard be? Some people can't help but think of the Yagami Kingdu and the Yagami Kingdu pirates, and their hearts are shaken. The record of the Yagami Kingdu pirates defeating the Whitebeard pirates is real. Look at the Whitebeards. Showing great power on the battlefield, he was about to rush under the execution stand all the way. Quote. Garp didn't respond, just sat there with his head down, as if the battlefield below had nothing to do with him at all. Watching Sengoku couldn't help but curse in his heart. The case of Whitebeard's great power and Garp's failure to attack, Luffy's group was finally unimpeded on the battlefield, and they rushed forward, and finally rushed to the execution stand. Ace. Luffy looked at the execution platform and called out. Ivankov's subordinate Lightning immediately created a staircase leading to the execution platform. Quote. Looking at Luffy who was rushing up, Sengoku couldn't help frowning, and he planned to clench his fists to shoot, but before he could do it, Garp, who had been sitting there with his head down, finally raised his head and rushed out. Cap. Seeing Garp rushing out, Sengoku was slightly relieved, but when he thought about the relationship between Luffy and Garp, his heart tightened, and he couldn't help but secretly scolded Garp for not being stupid. Garp's fighting power is undeniable. Pirate Ying before the Great Pirate Era, once defeated Kaido and Nyen's Captain Rocks. Strictly speaking, Roger is half a generation younger than Garp. In today's battlefield, Cap is determined to stop, except Whitebeard. Even Marco can't fly to the execution platform. But Luffy is his grandson. Garp gritted his teeth, but he couldn't swing his fist in the end, was knocked off by Luffy, and fell to the bottom of the execution platform. Why? Yagami Kanto was sitting at the top of the naval headquarters, watching this scene and shaking his head. After Garp gave up his resistance, Luffy finally rushed to the execution platform, and then, under the care of Warring States, with a miraculous twist, he opened Ace's Sea Tower stone shackles. Nice job, Luffy. Zoro Sanji and the others looked up at this scene and couldn't help but smile. But just because Luffy rescued Ace, no one noticed that Nami was surrounded by several major admirals and captains of the Navy headquarters. Her face was pale. Her attention also fell on Luffy and Ace. When she came back to her senses, she had already lost the team and was surrounded by the navy. Just when she wanted to call for help, the blades of several major generals were already mercilessly slashing. Come over. Although her strength is not bad, how can she be the opponent of the major general of the headquarters? Even if she resists desperately, she will be interrupted with a single blow. And just in the nick of time. In the void next to her, a hand suddenly stretched out, grabbed her shoulder, and dragged her back. Her whole being disappeared on the battlefield so suddenly. Who rushed over were all slashed, and their faces were dumbfounded. Gone. What's the matter? What ability is it? A group of people are completely clueless. As for Lieutenant General, General Aokiji and others, at the moment, all attention is on Fire Fist Ace and Straw Hat Luffy, and no one notices the situation here. 390th Chapters. Ruthless Pursuit. Admiralty Fortress Roof. A black hole appeared in the void next to Yagami Kingdu, like a mirror refracting. One of his hands penetrated into the void of the black hole, grabbed something, and pulled it back. The next instant, Nami's figure flew out of the void of the black hole and fell in front of Yagami Soto. Not knowing what was going on, she closed her eyes and screamed. Hey, stop calling. Yagami Kanto reached out and lifted her chin up, forcing her to stop screaming. At this time, Nami slowly opened her eyes, and then looked around in a dazed way, confused. Where is she? This is. She looked down and saw the scene of a melee on the battlefield. After Luffy rescued Ace, he was being pursued by Aokiji Akainu and others. At this moment, Yagami Kingdu was sitting there, wearing a black cloak, holding his knees with both hands, and looking at the battlefield below from a distance. You dare to come to this kind of place, you are really brave enough. While looking at the battlefield below, Yagami Kanto said casually. Seeing the figure of Yagami Kingdu, Nami gradually understood what was going on, and at the same time she breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time she couldn't help but look strange, and she didn't know whether to lean over or move away. It happened to save you this time. It was given to you before, something happened. The compensation that can go to the world to escape will be offset. Seeing that Nami didn't answer, Yagami Kanto said casually. Nami immediately heard it. Can't keep silent, how can you do it? A big man like you, how can you go back on what you say? Yagami Kingdu tilted his head to look at her, and said the same thing. So what should I do this time? I think about it, throwing you back on the battlefield will offset it. Spoke, Yagami Soto raised his hand and grabbed Nami. Nami was startled, she stepped back quickly, and said pitifully, how can a big man like you be so preoccupied? Well, that makes sense. Yagami Kingdu rubbed his chin and thought for a while, then waved at Nami. Come here, sit and watch slowly. Nami hesitated for a while, but in the end she couldn't think of a good way to resist, so she walked over obediently. Unexpectedly, he walked to Yagami Kingdu and sat down. Yagami Kingdu did not put his hands up or down on her, but still sat there with his knees, looking at the battlefield below. The battle that belongs to Whitebeard is almost over. Iori Kingdu looked at the battlefield below, his eyes flickered and muttered. No one knew what he was thinking at the moment. And Nami sat next to Yagami Kanto, looked at the battlefield below, and said, it's almost over, Ace has been rescued, the next thing is retreat. No, that's not what I meant. Yagami Kingdu shook his head and said, today's Whitebeard, even Akainu can only be suppressed, and cannot win in a short period of time. His body is aging too fast and deteriorating too fast. Even if he can leave this battlefield alive, how long can his body last for a year or two? Iori Kingdu spoke slowly. In this world, there are not many people who can escape aging. At this moment, on the battlefield below, Akainu started a ruthless pursuit of Ace and Luffy. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 398, Ruthless Red Dog. In fact, Ace's strength is no different from that of the 3 disaster generals, both of which can temporarily hold back the Admiral of the Navy. However, since he was first defeated by Blackbeard, he was imprisoned and tortured in the infinite hell. Liberated, the mountains and rivers are exhausted. In this case, it is naturally difficult to confront him head-on when he encounters a Kainu who is 1 point stronger. Ace. Seeing Ace being beaten, Luffy couldn't help exclaiming, and was about to step forward, but his body involuntarily knelt down and didn't obey. Continuous injection of Ivankov's hormones. His body has already reached the limit, but he has not noticed it yet. The sons of Roger One Piece and the Revolutionary Army Dragon are brothers. This is too surprising. The bloodlines of the two of you have constituted a big crime. No matter. Whoever is let go, the two of you must never let go. Akainu said coldly, and his eyes suddenly shifted to Luffy. Although Ace is exhausted, he is the captain of the 2nd and 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates. He can hurt Ace, but it does not mean that he can kill Ace in a short time. On this battlefield, fighters are changing rapidly, and fighting is impossible. Meaningful. Whoosh. With a lateral movement, Akainu came to the front of Luffy. Luffy. Ace turned around in horror. He could do anything. Zoro and Sanji, who were closer to Luffy, sensed something was wrong at the same time, and both rushed towards Luffy. Whoosh. Sanji didn't have time to get close. When he saw Akainu's fist attacking, he could only say sorry in his heart, and then kicked Luffy on the shoulder, kicking Luffy out. Akainu's magma fist washed down. Sauron swung his sword, the blade was instantly swallowed by the magma, and a sword was destroyed. Damn. Zoro stepped back and couldn't help but scolded secretly, but at the moment he didn't feel sorry for his sword at all, but said to Sanji, "Take Luffy away." Akainu didn't expect that his attack would fail because of Sanji's kick, so he couldn't help showing a gloomy look, and punched Zoro with a punch. Punch fell. Angry shouts from the left and the right came at the same time. Fire Fist. 3000 Tile Junction. At the beginning of the fight, they were fighting to the death or to the death. The 5 days and 5 nights of the battle were both lost. Ace and Jinpei, at this moment, joined hands in tacit understanding, and made Akainu bang backward. Damn. Akainu's face, and he turned his head to shoot at Ace again, but before he could do it, a dark shadow suddenly enveloped him. Seeing the domineering sense of the situation behind Akainu's body, Akainu's body suddenly froze, and his heart screamed something was wrong. He was patronizing to deal with Ace and Luffy, ignoring Whitebeard. Gotcha. Whitebeard looked at Akainu coldly. A sharp punch fell. On the battlefield, there is no right or wrong. Akainu took advantage of Luffy's inability to move and attacked Luffy, revealing flaws, and being caught by Whitebeard is naturally a causal cycle. Akainu was shattered by Whitebeard's punch, turned into lava, squirmed into the distance, and coughed up blood from the corner of his mouth. After all, it is the Admiral of the Navy, and Whitebeard's body has deteriorated again. This time, both sides were red-eyed. When Whitebeard came to the Navy headquarters, he had no intention of continuing to live at all. He ignored the fist attacked by Akainu, and slammed Akainu's head with a backhand punch. Chapter 399. One punch shatters the headquarters square. Boom. Whitebeard hit Akainu's chest with a punch, and at the same time, his fist also smashed into Akainu's head, instantly humming Akainu's mind, as if he had knocked over 5 flavors of vinegar. The whole person staggered backwards. Dad. General Akainu. The Whitebeard pirates and the Navy couldn't help but scream in horror. Whitebeard, who suffered the blow from Akainu, also deteriorated completely, and the whole person staggered backwards, but Akainu's condition was obviously worse, and he could hardly get up. Taking 2 steps back, Whitebeard stood still again. The hole in his chest that was blasted by the magma seemed to not exist at all, and the whole person was still terrifying. I said it before, you magma brat is only worthy of lighting candles at the birthday party. Voice fell, and Whitebeard held the naginata in both hands and slashed towards Akainu. Akainu was dizzy at the moment. Even if he knew that the situation was not good, he couldn't struggle to get up, seeing that Whitebeard's knife was about to fall. "Stop, Whitebeard." Sengoku, who was not far away, saw that the situation was not good, so he couldn't help shouting loudly, because Carp hadn't gone into a rage, he didn't have to bother to hold Carp down. At this moment, he suddenly revealed the form of a big Buddha, and a shock smashed it from a distance. With the shock condensed on the Whitebeard Naginata blade, and a violent roar erupted, causing the entire square to shatter. "Marco, take everyone and go." Whitebeard stood there without any intentions. He knew very well that the Whitebeard pirates could not retreat completely, and someone had to break the back. And on this battlefield, he is the only one who can break it, and he is the only one, the others are not strong enough. "Attention everyone. Don't let any pirates go." Sengoku knew what Whitebeard was thinking, and shouted at the navy under his command, and at the same time he rushed towards Whitebeard. Ace has been rescued. If the rest of the Whitebeard pirates still retreat, even if the navy kills Whitebeard in this war, it cannot be called a victory. "Gu la la la, your opponent is me." Whitebeard laughed loudly, swung his Naginata sword, and slashed towards the Sengoku. The aftermath of the swaying also bombarded the square of the Navy headquarters. The Navy headquarters shattered under the blow of Whitebeard. The shock was even more shocking, and the naval fortress at the rear also swayed, as if it was about to collapse. The terrifying power made Nami scream in surprise. Because of the violent vibration, her footing was unsteady, and she turned over and fell to one side. This posture of falling down is very unsightly, because Yagami Kangdu is sitting there with her legs crossed, and when she overturned, she just fell down on Yagami Kangdu. Fortunately, Nami's posture did not prevent Yagami Aoto from continuing to watch the battlefield below, and the space was distorted, and no one could see it. "Wow!" Nami quickly jumped off Yagami Soto's body, but her expression at the moment was very interesting. Yagami Kangdu watched the battle between warring states and Whitebeard, and saw that she didn't move, and said, "I'm hurting your head, so why didn't you say something?" Quote. Nami really wants to say that you can only hurt if you are a ghost. When she hit her, she felt that her head was hit, and she might have hit a red mark. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 400, Blackbeard Titch. Before she could say anything, the aftermath of the confrontation between Whitebeard and the Warring States period exploded again, the naval fortress shook again, and Nami stumbled again and fell backwards. But this time, he didn't fall to Yagami Kangdu, but fell directly below the fortress. Seeing the height of the naval fortress, she couldn't help screaming in horror, but before she fell down, her ankle was grabbed by a hand. Again. Yagami Kangdu grabbed her ankle, pulled her back, and glanced somewhere without leaving a trace. His expression remained unchanged. Nami wanted to cry very much right now. However, she recovered quickly. After regaining her stability, the picture she saw when she almost fell just flashed in her mind, and she was stunned for a second. She vaguely remembered that just now she seemed to have seen a large and strange guy and a group of strange figures under the fortress of the Navy headquarters. It doesn't look like a navy. It's almost my turn to play. Yagami Kanto didn't sit down any longer. He helped Nami to stabilize her figure, and looked at the battlefield below from the other side. Nami came back to her senses, and when she heard Yagami Kangdu's words, a look of surprise flashed in her big eyes, and she couldn't help but ask, "What do you want to do?" Those admirals below, Whitebeard or something, are already terrifying monsters, but this one is a monster among monsters. Once you do it, I am afraid it will be earth-shattering. I'm a pirate. Yagami Kangdu glanced at Nami and said, "In this case, of course, let's see if we can destroy the Navy headquarters." Destroying the Navy headquarters. Killing the Navy headquarters. The Navy headquarters. Nami wants to cry but has no tears. It really is a terrible goal. And while Yagami Aoto was talking, the black man hiding near the Navy headquarters. The beards were finally discovered by the Navy, and they were no longer hiding at all, and appeared directly. Ha 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 ha, Long time no see, Dad, it's great to meet you before you die, ha 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 ha. Laughing out loud, it was the Blackbeard Tiki who killed the captain of the 4th Division of the Whitebeard Pirates, Sachi, and led the fuse of this top war. And behind him is also the partner he searched all the way after defecting from the Whitebeard Pirates, and the subordinates rescued from the Advanced City, and now they are the Blackbeard Pirates. This moment, countless eyes were gathered. Warring State's face suddenly turned ugly. Although he guessed that Blackbeard might be coming to do something, he didn't expect that Blackbeard had already sneaked into the Navy headquarters. How on earth did you come here? Titch. Whitebeard's gaze shifted from Warring States to Blackbeard. His face was gloomy and terrifying, although his voice was low, it contained terrifying anger. At this time, through the special broadcast channel, looking at the people who were on the battlefield of the war, they all had expressions of horror on their faces. Some people called out the name of the Blackbeard Pirates, and some people recognized the people behind Blackbeard. Ferocious pirates. The giant battleship, the San Juan Hungry Wolf, and the Full Moon Hunter, Catherine. They are all big pirates on the evil side. Of the Blackbeard Pirates made the pursuit of the Navy once again stagnant. In the current naval headquarters, both Tautu and Chato are wearing the Navy's righteous cloak, and the former Admiral Black Arm Zephyr is also here.